Commissioner didn't provide you with lunch.
We did. Yeah. That's why we so relaxed.
Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to the South African Revenue Services. And I always have to try and remember that the last word must be services. My last job has the same letters, but the other one ended up with a B. And I seem to have a very good relationship with the day, the 1st of April. 6 years ago, I started a job at the Reserve Bank. 7 years later, on the 1st of April, I have to preside over some important numbers. As they say, probably the relationship with money is the most relationship, so you move from making the money to collecting it. The next time it will be, they will be collecting it from me, because they do now. But we have an hour, so with this hour that we have, we must try and do the best we can. The day is a day to announce the results, the revenue results of the South African Revenue Services. I know that you probably, our colleagues from the media and I, have a familiarity with almost 90% of the people here, that you may want to deal with all manner of things now that you are here. But we will appreciate that if we kept to the matter at hand that we are here for today. Obviously, if you ask a question and there is an answer for it, the principals will answer that. On the stage, I'm joined by the Minister of Finance, Minister Gordon, Deputy Minister Jonas, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Commissioner Moyane, the Director General of the National Treasury, and the Commissioner is Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, in case people think I don't know his name. Yes, no, I did say Commissioner. I was repeating his name. I did indicate that. So the Commissioner is accompanied by his executive, and they are sitting up in front here. He will take the opportunity to introduce them at the right time. Colleagues, the program is very short, in that there's only 2 people that are going to be talking to you. First up on the podium is going to be the Minister of Finance, and he will be followed up by the Commissioner. Then we'll open for question and answers. Minister.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to be on the podium. I'm going to speak from here. And I'll tell you what the order of speaking is in a moment. The program director and I didn't have a chance to align ourselves this afternoon, but it's very good to see lots of the old-timers from SARS. They're not as old as me, but they certainly have become bolder, grayer, and I won't comment on whether they're looking tired or not at the moment. But let me at the outset congratulate all of you and your team, Minister. I said Minister Moyane. Maybe there's good signs coming up for you. Commissioner Moyane, on the good work done, which we will get into the details of. We're going to do a few more things in our statement, and amongst them are to comment briefly on the Constitutional Court judgment yesterday, which required of the National Treasury certain functions to be performed, which need to be reported to the Constitutional Court. Secondly, the economic environment globally and how it impacts upon us. Thirdly, the domestic economic environment and where do we stand, particularly in relation to the fiscal numbers that we indicated in February in our budget 2016. And then the gross numbers in terms of revenue contributions towards that fiscal framework. And the Commissioner will then give you details about the various taxes and so on. Before he does that, the Director General of the Treasury will also give you an indication of where we stand in relation to the fiscal framework, because as I'm sure all of you know, although some of you are not used to Treasury press conferences, so we have to tell you that our numbers on the fiscal framework side say basically where do we get, or what revenue will we get, what debt will we incur or borrow, how much of interest will we pay on our debt. That's on the one side, and then what kind of expenditure are we planning for the financial year that started today. And it's important, particularly in the context of the ratings agencies keeping a very careful eye on us as a government in South Africa, particularly in respect of whether we have the ability, because that's the main business of ratings agencies, whether we have the ability and the willingness to pay back our debt, which stands just below 2 trillion rands, and whether we will meet some of our fiscal targets, which is where the Treasury commentary will actually come in. And our fiscal credibility as a country will depend on what government does as a whole, but also the contribution that the Revenue Service makes, because over 90% of what we spend in South Africa is money that we collect in taxes from our own citizens and businesses. So let me come back to the Constitutional Court judgment. So we have noted the judgment of the court in relation to the eNCA issue that it commented on yesterday. And the court judgment says the following, and I quote, "The National Treasury must determine a reasonable percentage of the costs of those measures which ought to be paid personally by the President. The National Treasury must report back to this court on the outcome of the determination within 60 days of the date of this order," which is yesterday. End of quote. So we as the Treasury are currently giving some detailed attention to the judgment itself so that we understand our instructions from the court very clearly. The Treasury will constitute a team with the necessary technical expertise and experts, including quantity surveyors and lawyers, to execute the mandate given to us by the Constitutional Court. And I can assure South Africans that the process will be transparent, thorough, and professional, and within the rules of public finance management as we've practiced as a government under the Public Finance Management Act. Where appropriate, I will consult with the Public Protector in terms of the information they have that would be helpful to us, and any other stakeholder that would help us to understand our mandate and execute our mandate as efficiently and as quickly as possible. Second is our economic environment, particularly the global environment, which has an important impact on the domestic economy and also on the revenue numbers at the end of the day. The global conditions still remain pretty difficult, and slow growth is still seen in most of the emerging market economies, although in the last 10 days or so there seems to be a minor change in sentiment and improvements in the currencies of the emerging markets, and perhaps a retreat from the fear, maybe a partial retreat at this stage, of currency wars that some in the G20 were anticipating. The challenging growth environment is one that many countries are trying to address within their own particular national contexts, and you'll hear a very common reference to structural reforms and structural constraints that need to be addressed by governments and societies in each instance in order that growth prospects can actually be improved. And there's no doubt that there's a connection between what happens globally in this regard and what happens domestically, although I'll come back in our own context about what we need to do to improve our own growth prospects, because improving our growth prospects means ultimately improving our revenue prospects. And improving our revenue prospects means that we have better fiscal outcomes, and ultimately, if we raise more revenue, we're also able to reduce the amount of borrowing, and that reduces the pressure on the interest that we pay on our borrowing as well. So that link is what needs to be very carefully understood by all of our role players. Clearly, many countries, including ourselves, are trying to increase investor confidence. And as you know, we've been on a roadshow recently with both representatives of the private sector and of the trade union movements in the country. And we're able to persuade many investors that we are still an economy that is investor-friendly and one in which they could safely invest, in our instance, in our bonds and in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which now has, I see, a competitor as well. Clearly, we need to raise the level of growth so that, as I said, we can increase revenue collection. And at the same time, there is, and we're very, very aware of this, a greater and greater public expectation that the rands that we collect in revenue through various tax mechanisms must be spent efficiently, effectively, and the public must be assured that those rands are not going into the pockets of individuals or groups of individuals, but is being spent for the benefit of the public at large in South Africa. So in that sense, we all, as government, have a huge responsibility, particularly in the current context, to persuade South Africans that their money is indeed well spent. And I'm sure the 14,000 people in SARS want to also be convinced that the hard work that they do in collecting the tax revenue is being spent in an appropriate kind of way. So, as far as emerging markets more generally are concerned, as I indicated, there's still, let's call it political economic factors that are impacting on many of the bigger emerging market countries. On the one hand, an economic slowdown in one form or another in many of the bigger economies as well. The one exception, of course, is India at this point in time. There continue to be concerns about whether the Chinese economy will have a hard landing or a soft landing, and whether the important transition that they are undertaking in their own economy is one that is going to be managed well, although there are many who do think that the Chinese government and authorities will in fact manage this difficult and important transition in their economy in the right kind of way. In the last few days, the Federal Reserve's commitment to a cautious approach to monetary policy tightening has given global conditions the kind of support that was required in order to increase risk appetite and to reassure particularly the financial sector that emerging markets could become still important prospects for investment in their particular regard. So you've seen the strengthening of the rand. I'm not sure how many of you are watching CNN the other evening. The chairman of the Fed, Ms. Janet Yellen, I think was talking at about 12 o'clock New York time. And the Dow numbers up to 12 o'clock were red. And the minute she said these words similar to the ones I spoke, repeated here, the stock exchange numbers all became green. So you can see the kind of influence that the decisions and the approach of the Federal Reserve of the United States has on the world economy, and whether we have more optimistic outlooks or pessimistic outlooks, particularly in respect of emerging market economies. International organizations such as the IMF and World Bank, which meet in about 10 days' time in Washington for their spring meetings, have undertaken an enormous amount of research into the kinds of structural reforms countries should be undertaking to promote inclusive growth. The spring meetings that I've just referred to will give countries an opportunity to share experiences and consider coordinated policy actions that can benefit all of the countries and increase the prospects of global growth, global trade, and global demand, all of which could have very positive effects for ourselves and most of the countries on our continent as well. Now, all of this doesn't mean, as we've said during the budget, that we must wait for the world to put itself right before we as South Africans begin to address our own economic constraints and opportunities. So this uncertain world outlook requires South Africa, and we've been saying this for a while now, particularly in our meetings with labor and with business, to take ownership and speedily deal with the domestic constraints to economic performance. Our young economy requires significant investment in human and physical capital, but high levels of uncertainty around the economic outlook, both externally and internally, require that we remain united and focused on tackling our socio-economic challenges. And through these efforts, which culminated in the 9th of February meeting at which the President was chairing and the Deputy President was present, and we had some 120 CEOs in Cape Town, we began to consolidate a process which would unify all of the resourceful people, particularly the CEOs of companies, around a common agenda so that we can develop a common positive narrative about our own country and ensure that, as many say, South Africa remains open for business. We must demonstrate to investors and the people of South Africa that we are undertaking concrete actions that are required to map a path for higher economic growth and progress on addressing poverty, unemployment, and inequality as we seek to preserve our investment grade rating. This is a message that we don't mind repeating a million times, and that is that all of us as South Africans, whether we're in government or outside, have a huge responsibility to project the right kind of image and a positive image of our own country, whatever the difficulties we might actually find ourselves in. And the second thing that we've learned from our investor roadshow, that the world is no longer interested in which plan is the most latest plan that you have in South Africa. What they want to know is, what are you doing with your plans? How are you implementing your plans? What milestones can they look at in order to establish whether implementation is actually taking place or not? And so the bar has been set fairly high by international investors for ourselves, and the recent visit of Moody's to South Africa, where they met a wide range of stakeholders, reaffirmed that this is the expectation that both we should set for ourselves, but the world expects of us as well. We need to be frank about what is working and what is not, and our engagements with institutions such as the IMF, which is due to visit for an Article 4 consultation later in April, are testimony to our commitment to frank and open engagement. South Africans are probably amongst the frankest in the world about the difficulties we have, both on the economic front and other fronts as well. And I think that's appreciated in some quarters. At the same time, when these sorts of visits takes place by ratings agencies or by the IMF, it's also important that we have a shared narrative as South Africans, both about our challenges, but much more importantly, about what are we doing about our challenges, and whether we have a credible plan to work together as labor, government, and business to overcome many of the challenges that we are very aware of, but at the same time be very proud of the achievements that we've been able to bring about as a result of the last 20 years of democracy in our country. Our cohesive and coherent approach, based on the collaboration between government, business, labor, and community, is going to be vital to ensure that we achieve what we commit to, and in so doing, shape our destiny and demonstrate to our people that we can lead the economy in a different direction and create that the much-needed jobs, investment, and growth to improve the livelihoods of South Africans. We are going to increasingly come under pressure to do innovative, different, and bolder things as South Africans, both to remove the constraints on our economy, like energy, for example, which is a huge constraint and probably deducts a percentage from our GDP growth at the moment, and other constraints that we have. And a number of stakeholders have pointed out to us that we are sometimes a harshly regulated state machinery that makes doing business in South Africa difficult in certain quarters. And part of the commitment that we've made as government is that we will address some of these uncertainties and regulatory issues a lot more urgently in the next 2 or 3 months to demonstrate our commitment as government to create the right kind of atmosphere and environment for both small and big businesses to thrive. Now, what does all this mean, both the global environment and the domestic environment, for the preliminary revenue outcome? Remember, what we are talking about here, in the first instance, is the amount of money as a result of the efforts of SARS, but there are others who also contribute tiny amounts, that goes into the National Revenue Fund. The National Revenue Fund is part of our constitutional machinery, since we had an important Constitutional Court judgment yesterday, and feeding into that National Revenue Fund and managing the National Revenue Fund is an important Treasury responsibility at the end of the day, because they've got to ensure that at a day-to-day level there's enough cash in the system to disperse to different government departments, provinces, local government and others that require that kind of money. So, to make the obvious point, tax revenues are generated from economic activity. When business confidence and investment are declining, economic growth tends to fall, as we've seen over the last, say, 2 years or so, dragging down tax collections. Over the past few years, National Treasury has consistently had to revise down projected tax revenue in line with weaker economic growth. Despite maintaining an expenditure ceiling over the past 4 years, and that's played a very important part in making sure that we manage the expenditure side of this overall fiscal framework that I described earlier on, the shortfall in taxes has produced a persistently large budget deficit. While the latest budget puts in place tough measures to close the budget deficit, our long-term fiscal sustainability will ultimately depend on higher economic growth. So one of the very obvious things that comes out in both domestic discussions and the global discussions we are having is that South Africans need to singularly focus on how do we dynamize and ignite growth in South Africa, without which we will not manage the kind of expenditure burdens that we are carrying as a government. What we've also been very careful about, and let me state the obvious, which we've done during the budget as well and in previous budgets, and that is that we don't yet have austerity in South Africa. We haven't drastically cut staff anywhere. We haven't imposed cuts on pensions and grants. We haven't taken away huge amounts of money from the social wages, we call it in South Africa, in education, health, etc. We might have delayed some of the infrastructure projects and so on, but without any major impact on immediate delivery as well. And so we don't want to get into a position where we have to consider harsher measures on the expenditure side. But there's no doubt that as we prepare the next budget, we've got to take a very different approach to budgeting, which we'll talk about in due course, which ensures that we take a much more careful and finer, micro look at what programs need to be funded within government and what programs need to be either cut or curtailed within government. So between 2015 and the 2016 budgets, the projected tax revenue for 2015-16 was revised down by 12 billion rands. However, tax revenues have been marginally more resilient than government had anticipated, and so the gross tax revenue for the fiscal year, that is the 15-16 fiscal year that ended yesterday, came in at 1,069 billion, let me say it again, 1069.9 billion, or 0.2 of a billion or 200 million more than the February estimate. That is the February 2016 estimate. So we must congratulate our SARS colleagues and the 14,000 odd staff on at least meeting the target under very, very difficult circumstances. But I suppose all of you are taxpayers as well, so we must thank you for being very compliant taxpayers. I hope none of you have been engaging in any schemes of any kind. But if you are, there are all the officials here to whom you might want to come and confess your sins, and they'll help you to get out of difficulties. Initial indications, which is something that the DG will elaborate upon, that the revised deficit as published in the 2016 budget review is broadly achievable. Now, this is a very important statement. There was always doubt about whether the kind of picture that we had put together in the fiscal framework in relation to the budget deficit for this year, but more importantly, the declining budget deficit and fiscal consolidation, as we call it, over the next 2 to 3 years is achievable or not. So we've met the first set of challenges in this particular regard. It is clear that the global economy is not going to be helpful for the next few years. Hopefully less, but that's what most people say. We need to redouble our efforts to increase policy certainty, catalyze entrepreneurship, a crucial factor in ensuring greater economic inclusion, particularly for black people. Innovation and the joint experience of the private sector and the public sector so that we can grow the economy. We will need to explore the opportunities that the continent offers a lot more assertively than we might have done up to now. Notwithstanding today's revenue outcome, the growth expectations of 0.9% for 2016 is clearly not enough to generate the kind of revenue that enables us to fund all of our government programs. Our focus on fiscal commitment will remain. We cannot spend money we do not have. You've heard this mantra many times, but let me repeat it. And we cannot borrow beyond our ability to repay. And you'll see that a very important theme in the budget was that we are going to taper off the debt to GDP ratio. In other words, we'll begin to hit about 50% of GDP, but we will, over the next 2 years, begin to taper that off. The one way of changing all of these numbers is to change the denominator. And the denominator is GDP, which equals growth. So if you change the growth picture, you change the denominator, the percentages change, and you look better as a country. And you can have greater flexibility to do certain things that we need to do as well. We need to inculcate a culture, as I said earlier on, of efficiency in our approach to spending. I know there's a lot of skepticism about that, and it's legitimate skepticism, because too many in government continue to defy decisions of cabinet about cost containment, not putting unnecessary adverts in newspapers, buying expensive cars in provinces and municipalities, and hopefully we will now begin to develop a momentum within government to monitor all of those misdemeanors and take much firmer action, including perhaps withholding certain transfers from government if there's abuse of public funds in the way that we might have seen it in the past. We've done that in some instances in terms of Section 2162 of the Constitution. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the staff at SARS and the National Treasury for the work that they have done and will continue to do. And given our tough economic environment that we find ourselves in, this revenue outcome is indeed an important and great achievement. We have built one of the most effective tax authorities in the developing world, perhaps even in parts of the developed world. I'm sure the Greek government would like to come and learn a few things from us. That has made huge strides over the past decades in enforcing the law. Our focus must also be to continue to maintain this level of performance. I would like to, in concluding, thank the most important people that have made all of this possible, and that is the compliant taxpayers of South Africa, and who have contributed their fair share to ensure that government has the resources it needs to make a huge difference in the lives of millions of South Africans. So my statement ends there. I'm going to invite the DG to say a few words about the fiscal framework and then hand over to the Commissioner.
Thanks, Minister. Let me do something I'm not well known for, to be brief. When we table a budget at the beginning of every financial year, or let me say towards the beginning of every financial year, we take a look at the revenue estimate, working with our SARS colleagues, both tax and non-tax revenue, that is, and we then also look at the likely expenditure outcome for the year. It's a material thing because that then produces the revised budget balance or deficit outcome for the year running. In this case, we're talking 15-16. In February, when we tabled the budget with the revenue estimate at that time, which you now know is changed, and the Commissioner will talk to the details. The Minister has already touched on the headlines relating thereto. We were projecting that we would achieve roughly the deficit that we had set in February of 3.9%. Couple of things that are very important today in relation to that. The Minister has said, in all probability, that now looks achievable. There are signs, one of them being the fact that the revenue performance is marginally better than what we're looking at. There are therefore initial signs to suggest that not only is what we were talking about achievable, there is a probability, and please don't overstate this in how it's carried out. It would seem that there are initial signs that the situation could be marginally better at the end. When will we know that when will we know the final outcome? Now we have a better sense of the revenue figures from our SARS colleagues. The next step is that departments like the one that I am the accounting officer for and the rest closed their books yesterday. It's not possible from yesterday to today to know everything. They are going to do a clean sweep of their numbers, do all the reconciliations. By the 31st of May, I apologize, by the 31st of May, we will have a much better sense now of what the preliminary expenditure outcome is likely to be. The initial signs are that it will almost not change the situation, but let me not say too much on that. What's very important then, afterwards, we get a better sense, and then by July, once the figures are audited, they are now final. We have the ultimate picture for 2015-19. Let me say that, so the deficit outcome looks really achievable. If anything, could be better. If anything, could be better. But we are still set, as the Minister is saying, looking at an improving situation going forward. We're resolute. We looked at, the budget says next year, financial year that we're in, starting today, the outcome or the projected deficit would be 3.2. What's very important about this, and this is the last point I will make on this, is the fact that between this year and next year, this financial year and next financial year, our public finances will switch from what we call a primary deficit to a primary surplus next year. That's the difference between non-tax revenues, non-interest expenditure, and taxes in a given year. This year, it is a negative 22.6 billion, give or take now the revisions that would arise from the new set of numbers we get today. We are projecting that next year it would be a positive 15.4 billion, in other words, in the 2016-2017 financial year. Why is this material for public finance management? It is only when your primary balance turns positive that you can decidedly say you are stabilizing your debt. In other words, the rate of change in your accumulation of debt begins to stabilize. That is very important because that is one of our fiscal objectives that we've been striving for. It now looks truly achievable. Come May and then later July, we will be able to determinately and finally say this year is what it will be But of course, at this time next year, we'll be able to talk in more detail and more authoritatively about 2016-17. Over to you.
So I will present to you the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services to deliver his remarks.
Program Director, Mr. Hlengan Matebula, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. Mcebisi Jonas, the Director General of National Treasury, Mr. Fuzile Lungisa Fuzile, members of the SARS Executive Committee, senior SARS officials present, senior officials from the National Treasury, members of the media, good afternoon. Firstly, let me make a correction. I'm the Commissioner, I'm not the Minister. Let that be clear from the beginning. It gives me great pleasure to address you today on the occasion of our preliminary revenue collection outcomes announcement for the financial year 2015-2016. Indeed, it seems like only yesterday that we're sitting in this very room outlining the revenue collection outcomes for the previous year. It is indeed a historical and momentous occasion, as this announcement speaks to the key mandates of the South African Revenue Services, providing the revenue for government to deliver on its program of creating a better life for all South Africans. That is what SARS is mandated to do. After all, SARS has never had to collect more than R1 trillion before. The achievement of the target of R1 trillion is indeed a momentous, historical, and for the first time in South Africa, and for the first time for SARS. We delivered on a seemingly impossible revised estimate of R1 trillion and 69.7 billion, surpassing it by 154,000,007 target. Lest we forget, last year we exceeded the revised estimate of 979 billion by 7.4 billion. This is an incredible achievement. At the center of this achievement is the enhancement of the operating model which had begun transforming SARS into an organization that has delivered the results we are announcing today. I could wax lyrical onto the multitude of benefits. However, the simple truth is that we live in a changing world, profound transformation with new dynamics and never before seen threats. We have taken the decision to evolve as an organization to survive and ensure that we collect all revenue due to the state. Part of this new approach has been a more hands-on approach regarding revenue collection. Indeed, my new leadership team and I have visited all our SARS regions numerous times since the beginning of the year, and countless branches to engage employees and taxpayers, listen, and to take suggestions where possible. Troubleshoot to ensure that the revenue collection process was seamless. I want to thank the establishment of the Group Executive Revenue Forum, a concept derived from the new operating model, which is the fulcrum and the epicenter of these outstanding results. By supporting the transformation process, underpinned by the strong tenets of the operating model for organizational alignment, SARS employees have augmented our focus on the success of our revenue program and the strategic initiatives. This has contributed towards the achievement of SARS transformation ambition of materially increasing revenue ensuring strong control over the South African ports of entry, and becoming a taxpayer and employee-centric organization in order to move South Africa forward. Everything we have done as an organization over the past financial year has been with the intention of ensuring that SARS become more efficient and effective so that we can provide government with the resources to make South Africa great. It is quite easy getting brilliant results when economic outlook is strong, but when sentiment is negative and GDP growth is down, the challenge is much harder. Indeed, economists will tell you that the buoyancy effect, which correlates taxpayer behavior and overall compliance with tax revenue realization, places an additional burden on tax administrations during difficult times. Let me refer to the content of the revenue collection. Given the headwinds faced by the global economy and the concomitant significant downturn revisions to the South African economic outlook, the challenging revenue target for the financial year 2015-2016 forced us as SARS to think outside the box and find new and creative ways of collecting the revenue due to the fiscus. This year, revenue realization was made even more difficult, given significantly declining consumption constrained further by an interest hike cycle and the deteriorating business confidence. The declining currency exchange rate provided real challenges to foreign business exposure. Added to the economic challenges, there's been a sustained barrage of vitriolic negative media reportage over the past few months. Whilst we are here today only to focus on our results, we must acknowledge that the 14,500 men and women of SARS remained focused, committed and tenacious when it comes to serving our country despite these distractions. Despite the seemingly insurmountable hurdle, what has made me proud of the team, ours was a single objective and commitment to reaching the revenue target. Despite the hurdles, we delivered. When many said we couldn't and continuously questioned the caliber of the leadership at the helm of this organization, we returned the numbers. In an era where complexity reigns supreme, simplicity is all too rare. In order for SARS to deliver on our mandate, two stakeholders remain central and critical. In our universe, the taxpayer and SARS employees are our reason for existence. Without the commitment and sincerity of the millions of honest taxpayers, reaching this target could have been a near impossible mission. At SARS, our aim has been to make it easier and more convenient for honest taxpayers to comply. Concurrently, it is vital that we turn up the heat and make it more difficult for the dishonest taxpayers to cheat the system. Ultimately, our vision is to make compliance requirements such as registration, filing, meeting one's deadline, and making payments to be more seamless than ever before. As an organization, SARS is seized with constantly improving our services to all taxpayers. Our aim is to provide a standard of service that makes it easy and as hassle-free as possible for taxpayers to meet the compliance requirements. Indeed, the base of our current review of operating model is premised on providing the taxpayer with the best possible service. A key component of this improved service is the expansion of our large business center under the new operating model. Importantly, we have decentralized this service and have made it more accessible to business across the country. Points of service will be located throughout South Africa, and we have devoted more resources across the relationship management and stakeholder engagement areas. To further enhance how we serve business, additional prominence has been given to our business, to our relationship management portfolio, with the function now elevated to the level of the group executive. This GE is tasked with ensuring we service key stakeholders to the best of our ability. My leadership team and I visited the entire country to get to grips with the revenue collection. It was a baptism of fire for many of the new chief officers at the South African Revenue Services now. A new phenomenon of visible hands-on leadership was inculcated, ready to listen and learn. Dialogue with the taxpayer and SARS employee was at the heart of these visits. Being at the coalface allowed my leadership team to synthesize and provide solutions to various challenges. We have listened to the insights and we are using it. The reception and welcome we received, we can only be described as humbling. The pledges of support and the relentless march to the attainment of the SARS revenue estimate was indeed a humbling experience and epitomizes everything that is great about our country and SARS. On this historical occasion, I would like to single out and applaud all our outstanding, hard-working SARS employees and millions of our taxpayers. You have allowed us to shine as an organization. I would also like to thank our various banks for the role they played in facilitating our revenue collection. Not many of you might be aware that our revenue collection activity for the financial year continues until midnight of yesterday. The collection of revenue until such a time would not have been possible without the assistance of banks and their cooperation. SARS meeting the revenue target is about you, our partners, the taxpayers, and the employees. Allow me to emphasize the following revenue statistics. SARS collected 10699 trillion, which is 8.5% growth in total revenue from 2014-2015. This is 154.07 million above the revised estimate announced in the February 2016 budget. This revenue performance was made possible by an extraordinary drive by SARS on special initiatives, which is an aggregate secured revenue of approximately 100 billion. This closing of the compliance gap compensated for revenue collection shortfall caused by a slowing down economy. The successful outcome of the 2015-2016 revenue drive lifted the estimate tax to GDP ratio from 25.1% anticipated in the 2016 budget to 26.3%. The three main drivers of revenue contributions for 2015-2016 and this way. Personal income tax, total collection was 389.3 billion, which were 3.9 billion or less than 1% lower than the revised estimate in the 2016 budget of the 393.1 billion. This is 35.3 billion or 10% higher than the 353.9 billion outcome of the previous financial year. With respect to corporate income tax, or what you call CIT, the total collection was 193.5 billion. This is 1.9 billion, or 1% above the revised estimate in the 2016 budget of 91. optimize new visits to all those revenue forums, during which guidance was provided on the regional revenue plans and challenges. During the financial year, service channels completed another successful revenue collection drive while maintaining service delivery. The contact center and the branch operations made 1 million and 1.1 million outbound calls, respectively, totaling 2.1 million outbound calls for the year. Furthermore, 1.2 million reminder and demand SMSs were delivered to taxpayers with outstanding debt. These efforts resulted in revenue collection of 2.52 billion rands to date. During the 2015-2016 financial year end, the risk engine alerted 2,125,402 returns, preventing 17.37 billion refunds from being paid out. The bulk of this was against VAT refunds of 10.68 billion, which is 414,035 returns, followed by personal income tax of 4.89 billion, representing 1,592,711 returns. And finally, CIT, 69,734 returns were looked into, which yielded 1.54 billion. This saving excludes a further 4.5 billion refunds that were debt equalized across all other tax types that had debt against them. These processes and systems enhancements were instrumental in preventing revenue leakages this year. A concerted effort was applied this year in focusing on taxpayers with outstanding returns. This initiative had a due effect, namely improve compliance and improve revenue collection. During the 2015-2016 financial year, SARS contacted 90,000 taxpayers with multiple tax return outstanding. This intervention resulted in 268,801 returns being submitted and a payment of 2.45 billion collected. This initiative will now form part of business as usual in the new financial year. This outstanding achievement is a direct result of the consistent perseverance and commitment to service delivery and revenue collection efforts by the service channels. With respect to compliance, as has been the case previously, SARS will continue to focus on all the pillars of compliance, namely registration, filing, declaration and payment, in order to reduce the tax gap. Improved compliance will be pursued in a variety of ways, including educational, outreach, and enforcement initiatives. These revenue results, along with successes of the tax season a few months ago, illustrate that South Africans, by and large, want to do the right thing. It is pleasing that millions of South African taxpayers agree that meeting their tax obligation is cool. This high level of compliance contributes to nation building and enables the government to deliver service that improves the quality of life of all South Africans. In conclusion, I would like to thank my family, my wife in particular, who took all the pains and stresses and insults I carried daily with me by the scornful and disparaging media articles she spurred me on. Despite all attempts and efforts by naysayers and doomsday prophets to distract our attention to the core mandate of SARS to effectively and efficiently collect all revenue due to the fiscals, today we have closed that chapter. Aspersion was cast on my person as incompetent, incapable, inept leader of this important institution. My personal integrity was questioned. In this hallowed and sacred environment where we dare to tread how sacrilegious it is that a team ably led by an African can not only overcome socio-historical prejudice, but set the bar so high for its entire employees that it begs belief. Working together, unity in action, we can achieve indeed and deliver the seemingly impossible against all odds. I would like to take this opportunity further to reintroduce my EXCO team. This is our first revenue announcement as a new team. Mr. Jed Mikaletos, sitting on the right, Chief Officer for Customs and Excise. Mr. Jonas Makwakwa, Chief Officer for Business and Individual Taxes, BAIT. Mr. Hlengani Matebula, Chief Officer, Strategic Communication and Enforcement. Kosilo, Chief Officer, Legal Counsel. Matsawani Matwa, Chief Financial Officer. Tebogo Mokoena, Chief Officer, Human Capital and Development. I am looking forward to many more successes with yourselves. I would like to thank the group executives and all their managers. Most importantly, my entire 14,500 employees at SARS, the unsung heroes and heroines who at all material times lived to our motto, at your service, and for the exceptional work they are putting into meeting our commitment to all the South Africans. Last but certainly not least, thanks to all the South African taxpayers and traders who contributed to this historical tax revenue result. Without you, this target would not have been achieved. Ndza khensa swinene hi mbilu ya mina hinkwayo na ku titsongahata eka varhangeri va ndzawulo ya xibalo, vatirhikulobye ni vaaki va Afrika-Dzonga ku hi tshemba leswaku hi hlengeleta nhlayo leyikulu swonghasi. Mintirho ya vulavula. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, we will now take questions, and there is a roving mic. I will appreciate if you identified yourself and the media house you represent.
Sure.
And possibly indicate which official you are asking your question to. Let me start with you, Miriam. There's a thing next to you.
Thank you. It's Mariam Issa for the Sunday Times. My question is for the Minister. When we saw you at the end of your roadshow, you said, or you indicated to us that you were hopeful that we wouldn't be downgraded to junk status, and described your meetings with investors and rating agencies as constructive. Since then, we've had several major political events which have shaken investors again. Are you concerned at all about the effect these might have on our credit rating? Will these have a negative effect? Thank you.
The colleague next to you, Sudana.
I have two questions. Karen Morn from eNCA. The first is about the over 1 trillion rand that's been collected by SARS. Is that a final figure? Does that include refunds, diesel rebates, and have any, those kind of things? Or is this the final amount that's been that has been collected? Because we have had a number of claims from people that they haven't actually timeously received refunds, and that may be contributing to the number. And then to both the Minister and the Commissioner, I'm sure that many people you are very acutely aware of the reported tensions in your relationship. Given how the Minister has spoken so impassionedly about the impression in the public and with overseas about the state of our economy, do you believe that your relationship is now in a position where you can work together? Is there a sustained future of a relationship between you, particularly given that the Minister has called the Commissioner defiant, and the Commissioner has made a complaint which seems to be the basis of a criminal probe against the Minister? Is the situation sustainable? Thank you.
Hillary.
Hilary Joffe from Business Day. My questions are to the Commissioner. The first one is, Commissioner, you've told us quite a lot about your operating model and its successes, and I think I and taxpayers would be interested to know how much this has cost you. The estimates in the market are that the Gartner contract was 150 million's worth, and the Bain contract, those being the two consultants which you have revealed, I think previously were the consultants on the new operating model, that the Bain was worth another 150 million. So I was wondering if you could confirm those numbers, and if those are not the numbers, tell us how much the consultants' fees on the new operating model have been. My second question relates also to refunds. If I can just go back to what you told us a minute ago, perhaps you can tell me if I understand this correctly. You have challenged over 2 million tax returns, if I'm right, or the refunds on 2 million tax returns, amounting to a total of, as I understand it, roughly 22 billion rand. So in other words, do I understand correctly that about 22 billion rand worth of refunds that taxpayers would otherwise have got, they're not going to get because the SARS believes that they don't really justify those refunds? Okay, so that's the first part of the refund question. And if SARS has been giving refunds which it shouldn't have in the past, you know, why would that be? And the second is also, can you tell us, over and above that 22 billion, how much are you holding in refunds that are due to taxpayers, and what's the sort of average age, if you like, of the refunds? I mean, how long, on average, are taxpayers in all of the categories, categories having to wait at the moment, on average, for their refunds? Thank you very much.
Can we take one last question for this round?
Olivia Commander from Reuters. Olivia Commander from Reuters. My question is to the DG. I just want to get clarity on the 3.2% figure you gave on deficit. Is it a projected estimate for the financial year just ended or for the 2016-2017 one? Okay, thanks.
Okay, we will attend to those questions. That's fine. All right, that's fine. Let's do that. Andile, the colleague next to you then.
Thank you
I saw
very
you
much.
having a mic.
Thank you very much. It's Connie Hanjab, also from the Sunday Times. My question is with regards to the restructuring process. At Commissioner Moyane, are you done with the restructuring process? And Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, if you could just say, now that you've probably engaged with the leadership of SARS, are you now more comfortable with the restructuring process after calling it defiant initially? That's my two questions. And perhaps on the Nkandla or the court judgment that came out yesterday, just in terms of the quantity surveyors and the people that are going to be involved, are these external people or internal Treasury officials that will constitute this team? Thank you.
Lady Beck, can I give a mic, please?
Amina Akram from SABC Economics. I just want to ask the Commissioner, in terms of the revenue collection, does he have a figure of those that haven't paid their taxes, and from which? Is it corporate, is it personal, and how much is that sitting at in terms of maybe do they have an idea, the people who are illegally operating? Maybe just to give us an estimate of how much that money is in terms of what is supposed to be collected.
Just park the mic next to you. I'll come back here.
Hello, it's Kevin Crowley from Bloomberg News. It's a question for the finance minister. Have you had any feedback from the Hawks on the responses? You sent them on Wednesday, and have they indicated if they're satisfied with those responses? Thank you.
Afternoon, Minister Commissioner. Niklas Bar from eNCA. Commissioner, maybe you could tell us what the status is of the importer-held custom bonds, SARS customs bonds, if any have been liquidated to boost the numbers that you've announced this afternoon in terms of revenue collection. And then, Minister Gordon, are you at all worried about the political implications of the Treasurer being instructed to come to an amount for upgrades to the eNCA residence that the President owes? And the political implications I'm referring to is, we all know about the Hawks investigations very soon after you became Finance Minister, again in a very, very hotly contested position. So are you at all worried that your work will be interfered with in reaching the final amount that the President needs to owe? By anyone?
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nzagisa. I'm from Business Day newspaper. Hi, am I audible now?
Yeah, go ahead, Nzagisa.
My name is Nzagisa. I'm from the Business Day newspaper. The question is for the Treasury. The Public Protector's Office has requested 3 million rand to investigate some of the complaints that her office has been receiving regarding the Guptas. Is Treasury going to make that money available? Thank you.
The gentleman in the corner there.
Olani Mbanja from the City Press newspaper. My first question is to the Minister of Finance. Minister Gordon, when you look at the Nkandla, all the Nkandla documentation from the Department of Public Works, a figure was already attached to the President, a figure of 10 million rands, which was never sent to the President. Will you be looking at that? Because already people within the Department of Public Works have said that we've done that work before. It's there. It was never sent to the President. So the initial figure was 10 million rands. Are you going to be looking at that? And yes, how long would it take for you to actually adhere to that request from Advocate Matonsela? How long do you think that would take to actually give those funds? Thank you.
Can we just answer this once and then, or you want?
Just an additional question, please.
Just an additional question which can wait for the second round. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just want to add it to what my colleague asked. The President said that there's mediation efforts between Commissioner Moyane and Minister Gordon in the difficulty in their relationship. If you could perhaps, either the Commissioner or the Minister, give us an update in terms of where that mediation process is and what is the status of the relationship between you very senior role players in the South African economy.
Colleagues, there's not going to be a second round, so can we just deal with the questions and finish them now? If not, there are those who have requested interviews who can deal with those questions in those one-on-one interviews. Kola, you want to have a last question?
I'm just wanting to know if the SARS or the National Treasury would be interested to have a look at what the Economic Freedom Fighters said yesterday about some 6 billion rand being whisked away out of the country. Would you, because you are the two highest officers that would look into that, would you be interested in actually, are you even interested to actually look at that? Thank you.
Colleagues, that's it. In respect of answers from SARS, the Commissioner may ask some of the executives to chip in from some of the expert areas that he might decide to direct questions to people.
Thank you very much, Minister. And the question from eNCA was the 1 trillion that we have announced, whether it's final. Certainly it's final. There's reconciliation that is taking place for the sweeping that might not have taken place in order to reconcile with the banks. But certainly that which we have announced today is the final figure that we can openly and officially announce to everybody, to South Africans. In the few days it might be more, precisely because in the whole shipping system there's some outstanding figures that are But what we are officially announcing to yourselves is that as of today, with all the other mechanism glitches in the system, we have achieved and surpassed the target. That's the first one. The issue of the, I think it's from Hillary, on the operating model, I think we could be able to provide you with the details on the operating model and the costs for both Guyatna and Bain. That sits within the team that is on the project management. And certainly that information will be given to yourselves without much ado. Revenue collection, in terms of whether there are still outstanding people who have not paid their taxes, I think it came from, pardon? The refunds. Well, the refunds has always, I would like to say, since I joined SARS, even last year there's been since complaints that when we deliver the numbers that a number of people will emerge and say, you have not paid our refunds. It's a constant factor. But certainly, as an institution of state, our duty is to pay all refunds that have been audited. And once we've been able to have the data and the details with respect to a particular taxpayer or a company, SARS is obligated to make those refunds paid. So we'll receive, I think, as from today or tomorrow, a number of complaints, and some at times are mislocated, and at the same time, where effective responses are needed, we do pay those refunds. Certainly, we don't keep refunds, VAT refunds, for the sake of withholding them, but there's a legitimate process of finding out as whether we avoid what you might call fraudulent tax cases that we have seen in the media that we have reported to yourselves. So both on CIT and PIT, those are the issues that we deal with. I would like perhaps Ujat to respond to the issue of the customs bonds that has been raised here as to whether that money trickled into the final fiscus.
Thank you, Commissioner. I can confirm that no bonds were cancelled with clients to boost the collections.
Randall?
Just on the question of refunds again, SARS assumes a risk management approach to refunds, and if you pass that risk rules that are instituted, then your refund gets paid out. If it gets diverted, it gets diverted to audit, and once audit has satisfied itself, that is it.
Minister? I'm done, Minister.
I'll probably handle one question around the political developments and their implication on the downgrading. Firstly, I think I want to start off by saying, really, I mean, it's anything that we can say around that is speculative, because I think some of these things are up in the air. But it needs to be said, though, that from the Treasury perspective, and I dare say government broadly speaking, we committed to sticking to the targets that we set for ourselves, irrespective of what the environment looks like politically. But secondly, I think we must also say that from Treasury that political stability and stability in general and certainty is a critical element, a variable in ensuring that we looked at differently by financial markets and those and the grading agency generally. There's a lot of work already that we're doing to ensure that we strengthen and create a more certain environment. There's work that we're doing with business. There's a whole range of discussion between different clusters in government to try to deal with the regulatory bottleneck and solve those policy areas that are still uncertain. But broadly speaking, I think we would argue from Treasury side that the achieving certainty across all spectrum should be one of the primary objectives that we uphold as government and probably as private sector generally. Thanks.
Okay, let's just round up. Miriam, your point about the downgrade, which is related to what the Deputy Minister has been saying. which is what we've been saying for much of the 10 weeks or so that I'm in this job. Just remember that. And that is that we have huge potential as a country to dynamize our economy, to unite our people, to meet the various poverty, job creation, and other targets that we have. But we also tend to shoot ourselves in the foot every now and again. And what I did say at the press conference after the roadshow is that every little squeak we make as South Africans is heard. Certainly in the 3 cities we went to, London, Boston, and New York, and the 265 investors that we met, who asked us all sorts of rigorous questions. And so the appeal that we've made to all the parties in South Africa is a very simple one. Be aware of what you say and what you do, and understand what it means to put the national interest first, and understand the kind of discipline that that requires, and the mindset that it actually requires. Because this job is a tough job. It's tough to persuade people, guys, allow us to borrow 165 billion this coming year. We're going to borrow 165 billion, but don't worry about the noises we make. The second point I made, and Miriam, I think you were there, is that whether it's the ratings agencies or the investors, portfolio and bond investors that we talk to, in my previous term, most of them would stick to the narrow path. What's your fiscal numbers? Do you pass the fiscal metrics? Do you have enough credibility as a government to be willing and able to pay your debt? Today, there are many more requirements. They start at that level. The second question is how you're going to grow your economy. And as I pointed out earlier, give us evidence that you're actually implementing your plans. And so, even yesterday, I was in a meeting of Business Unity South Africa with probably 50, 60 executives from various companies and representative organizations of BUSA, where we had the same conversation. How do we create a proper climate for you to invest in your own economy and in your own country, so that we can inspire confidence amongst others to come and invest in this economy? And we're serious about this project. Because if we're not serious about it, as all the role players in this country, inside government and outside government, there is no point in mouthing slogans about we care for our people, on the one hand, and on the other hand, actually damaging the prospects of this country being able to alleviate poverty for tens of millions of people who find themselves there. So we are quite serious about creating an environment where there's far greater levels of cohesion, where we can share a narrative. And I can say without hesitation that certainly amongst the team that went on this investor roadshow and many that we've met since then, there's a hugely positive response. There's a hugely positive response. The rest of us must come to the party now and understand what it means to put the national interest first and ensure that we are all committed to making this country work. So, will the current or subsequent political events have an impact? I don't know. I think we must wait to see how the court judgment ripples through our political economy. But let me finish the previous point. The fiscal metrics, the growth story, and the third element then, which is fairly new, last, say, 2-3 years, 2.5 years, is what's your politics like? Because your politics in your country, which is the point I think the DM was making, decides whether you're going to create more political uncertainty, whether you create more policy uncertainty, and where there is policy uncertainty, nobody's going to invest. Where we can't clear up our own regulatory backlogs. For example, the mining bill, the MPRDA, and get it quickly through Parliament so that we create policy certainty in that environment. And there are many others that have been identified in the discussions that the President has led with the private sector Because those are within our ability. They're within our power to actually influence and manage. And I believe that if we start beginning to send those signals, maybe we can mute some of the impact of the political events. So that threesome, your fiscal metrics, where's your growth going to come from, and the politics of your country are three important elements that all of these people look at and question us on. So what we say here and what we do here is heard within minutes, because some of you here are either tweeting or going through the networks, and they already know what's the number that we've actually announced today, and decide whether our fiscal framework is sustainable and whether we can credibly talk about some of the things that we are talking about. On the refund story, the Commissioner was just saying that this is a frequently raised question. But what we're going to do is have a little bit more dialogue on this issue and try and understand where does the complaint come from, because different types of refunds have different legislative frameworks within which they work. So VAT, for example, SARS has 21 days before a VAT refund needs to be prosecuted. But within the same 21 days, I think the Tax Administration Act, amongst others, has also placed an obligation on SARS that if you're not going to give me my money in 21 days, notify me. If you're auditing me, tell me. Now, I need to check at the operational level whether SARS is actually doing that before we can actually answer your questions. But we'll do that shortly when we meet next week. Several of you have raised the questions around relationships and working relationships and so on. The answer simply is that that's work in progress, and that I'm of the firm view on two things. One is that we must behave like professionals, because we are professionals, and do that which is necessary in the national interest, because for me and for my colleagues, that's an absolute priority at the moment. And secondly, one of the lessons that South Africa is learning at the moment is the importance of functional, well-run, credible institutions. You've heard me say this many more times in the past 10 weeks. I'll say it many more times in the next 10 weeks. Because institutions matter. And the Constitutional Court yesterday demonstrated that for us. That we actually have a resilient democracy. And that what we thought was a paper document called the Constitution actually has force and effect in a constitutional state. And holds all of us to account. We are members of the executive. We are all members of the public administration in South Africa, on either side of me. And all of us have accountability in terms of the Constitution and its relevant provisions, both in respect of the values that we need to promote, and that was an important point yesterday, and the kind of oaths that we take and how we subscribe to them, but also the accountability that we owe to Parliament, and which we have to work hard at improving as well. I think the Commissioner answered those other questions about the money spent. The deficit question has been resolved.
On the judgment, we're using both external and internal capacity.
I'm coming to that. What? No need to rush, you see. That's the next point. On the statement says very clearly that we will get expertise. I don't think we have quantity surveyors. I have some farmers. I know guys who know cattle very well, who can talk to you about raising and growing maize in the Eastern Cape. And the type of cattle, I'm told from my right. But on the question of quantity surveying, I don't think we have those skills. So those are the vital skills that we need to get. And we will be looking, Mr. Mbanjwa, at all of the documents that are relevant to our task given to us by the Constitutional Court, and try to prosecute that work as quickly as possible. On the Hawks question, I'll let you know when I'm ready to let you know. And Nicholas's question about political implications, I think the court judgment yesterday is very clear. It says, here's a piece of work you've got to do. What's the reasonable amount that needs to be paid for reasonable costs incurred in constructing certain facilities, firstly. Secondly, it says we report directly to the court. Thirdly, I had a voice clip, I think probably on your radio station this morning, of the Chief Justice, which says that once we present the document within 60 days, the Constitutional Court will certify that document. And once that document is certified, then the payment process kicks in, which is the 45-day process that they've indicated. And we will do our job to the best of our ability and make sure that it's done in a transparent and technically correct way. Public Protector and the 3 million rands. I'll just give you a brief answer, but if the DG wants to add, he can do that. The way the Public Protector's budget works, similar to the SARS budget, is that the Department of Justice in that instance, the National Treasury in the SARS instance, actually is appropriated the money, but that money is meant to be transferred to these institutions. And any additional funding that is required within a fiscal year, certainly before September, because September is when we start looking at adjustment appropriations for no other reason, we will then have to have discussions, as will the Public Protector, with the Department of Justice to see whether they could trim some of their other expenditure to find the 3 million rands. But we'd like to be as helpful as we can, because clearly yesterday again the court emphasized in a very clear way the importance of the institution, David as it might be, versus Goliath. The Public Works question we've answered. How long will it take on the Public Protector's funding? I've just indicated that to you. The EFF, I'm sure they have very able legal advisors, and if they have a formal complaint about what they've raised yesterday, they should raise it through the appropriate legal channels, and then the appropriate agencies can actually deal with that. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, ours is a tough economic environment. It's an environment which requires maximum national cohesion. It requires all role players, and I say this wherever I go, as does the Deputy Minister and the DG, requires all role players to understand what national interest is and to put that as the primary and most important thing that we need to protect, so that A, we can inspire confidence in this economy, B, we can inspire trust amongst our own people, and C, we encourage professionalism and integrity in all of the institutions that serve South Africans. And that's certainly what we are committed to. Thanks again very much for being here today.
Colleagues, that marks the end of this press conference. Just to indicate to you that it is a great day for SARS today. The picture you see, it is a picture of the Belleville office in Western Cape with the commissioner and the staff in the call center there, celebrating the fact that we've been able to reach our commitment. And with that picture, it is indeed something to be celebrated for all South Africans and the people of SARS specifically, because they have indeed worked very hard. Thanks so much. Those who have asked for interviews, you will be directed to the areas where you will meet with the people you are interviewing.